In the heart of Europe, a war that has reshaped global politics still rages. But on Ukraine's far western frontier, in the quiet city of Uzhhorod, a statement was made that could signal the beginning of a very different kind of transformation, one not of destruction, but of security, of permanence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, now a symbol of resilience to many, declared that thousands of Western troops could potentially be deployed in his country, not during war, but as part of a future peace agreement. The message was short, deliberate, and deeply strategic. He said, "I will not talk about the numbers, but it is important that we are discussing all this. Yes, it will definitely not be single digits, but in the thousands, and that is a fact. But it is still a little too early to talk about it." Zelensky's words, like many of his since 2022, were chosen with precision. Behind the measured tone is a statement with sweeping implications. Ukraine may be preparing for a future where international security forces are not visitors, but residents. The question is no longer if the West will stand with Ukraine during conflict. It's whether the West will stand in Ukraine once the fighting stops. To understand the weight of this declaration, we must first understand the battlefield and the backdrop. Since February 24, 2022, Ukraine has endured relentless attacks from Russia in one of the most devastating land wars Europe has seen since the Second World War. Cities have been leveled, millions displaced. But amidst the rubble, Ukraine has held and, in some places, pushed back. Its survival has been powered not just by its own will, but by an unprecedented level of Western support, billions in aid, thousands of tons of weapons, military training, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic backing. Yet none of these things represent permanence. Now the conversation is shifting from supporting Ukraine during war to securing Ukraine after war. The mention of thousands of troops is more than symbolic. It echoes a historical truth. Peace is often secured not just by treaties, but by boots on the ground. Throughout history, the presence of international forces has marked the line between peace and provocation. From post-war Germany to South Korea to Kosovo, foreign troops have helped stabilize regions, deter aggression, and shape the long-term trajectory of fragile peace. And yet, in this case, the dynamics are even more sensitive. Ukraine is not just any country, it's a buffer zone between Russia and the West, a democracy on the front lines, and any decision to station troops there, even under the banner of peace, will be interpreted as a challenge by Moscow, likely an escalation, which is precisely why Zelensky chose his words carefully. He didn't name specific nations, he didn't speak of timelines or treaties, but his intent was clear. Ukraine is already planning for the day after, and that planning includes the possibility of thousands of foreign troops, possibly NATO, possibly non-aligned partners, helping to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty in the fragile years after the war. And that planning may already be underway. The location of Zelensky's statement, Uzhhorod, is telling. Situated on the western edge of Ukraine, bordering Slovakia and near Hungary and Romania, it is one of the few cities untouched by direct combat. It's also a key logistical route for Western supplies, and perhaps a future staging ground for peacekeeping or security forces. The selection of Uzhhorod for this message was no accident. It suggests that a Western military footprint in post-war Ukraine may begin not near the front, but deep in the rear, serving both symbolic and operational purposes, far from the reach of Russian artillery, but close enough to reassure the Ukrainian people and send a message to the Kremlin. For Western leaders, Zelensky's statement presents both an opportunity and a dilemma. On one hand, deploying peacekeeping forces or long-term trainers and advisors could cement Western commitment, help rebuild Ukrainian institutions, and prevent future aggression. On the other hand, any such deployment could be seen by Russia as a provocation, fueling accusations that NATO is creeping closer to its borders. And yet, some military strategists argue that deterrence is the point. Much like the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence battalions stationed in the Baltics and Poland after Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, a small but capable international force in Ukraine could serve as a tripwire, one that signals Western resolve and raises the cost of any renewed aggression. But there are risks. No country, not even one as resilient as Ukraine, wants to become a permanent garrison for foreign troops. The optics matter, the structure matters, and so does the sovereignty. What Ukraine appears to be signaling is not occupation, but cooperation. A model more akin to what we see in Germany or South Korea, where local and international forces work together under shared command and mutual interest. Still, it raises deeper questions. Would this deployment be under NATO, the EU, or a new coalition entirely? Would it be limited to training or extend to border patrols and rapid response units? And crucially, how would Russia respond? Experts say much depends on the shape of the eventual peace. If the war ends with a negotiated agreement that includes Russian concessions or withdrawals, international troops could be part of the enforcement mechanism, ensuring compliance, protecting buffer zones, or supervising demilitarized areas. If, however, the war ends in a frozen conflict with no formal peace, then Western troops in Ukraine could be seen as provocative by Moscow, potentially setting the stage for future confrontations. In Kyiv, the public remains wary but hopeful. Many Ukrainians understand that lasting peace may require a visible international presence. And after years of watching their cities bombed, their children displaced and their borders violated, the idea of Western troops permanently stationed feels less like foreign interference and more like long overdue insurance. But in Western capitals, debates are already underway. How far should NATO go? Should EU countries send peacekeepers? What happens if those troops come under fire? Would the West risk escalation to protect post-war Ukraine? These are not easy questions, but Zelensky's statement suggests they are now unavoidable. For now, the president maintains a careful tone. He says it is too early to talk about it, but his mere acknowledgement of the discussions tells us that the foundations are being laid. And if history is any guide, peace is not simply declared. It is built, often by soldiers standing on foreign soil, not to fight, but to ensure that fighting does not return. For Ukraine, the war is not over, but the planning for peace has begun, and the world must decide what role will it play, not just in defending Ukraine, but in anchoring it to the future. As the rubble clears and negotiations draw near, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The end of war is not the end of struggle. It is the beginning of responsibility.